Pizza Prince, my uncle joked. I just smiled. 25 minutes later, my cousin's fiancée looked at her phone, went pale, and showed it to him. He muttered, "That can't be him." I can still hear the echo of my uncle's mocking laughter that night, a sound that, for years, had been the soundtrack to my deepest frustrations. He thought he'd delivered the ultimate punchline, but he had no idea he was just setting the stage for his own comeuppance. Still delivering pizzas? He'd boomed, loud enough for everyone to hear, his voice dripping with this fake, saccharine pity. Then he added, "Well, I guess someone's got to do it." A few people nervously chuckled along, unsure if they were supposed to, but I just smiled. My hands were in my pockets, playing it cool, just like I always did. But deep down, something sharp twisted in my chest. Not embarrassment, not shame, but that familiar, bitter sting of being utterly underestimated again. My name's Ethan Parker. I'm 29. And yeah, for a while, I delivered pizzas. But that's not the whole story. Not even close. You need to understand the full picture, because the truth, it only really hits hard when you have all the pieces. See, I grew up in one of those families. You know the type. Loud, opinionated. Everyone's got an unsolicited opinion on your life, and they're definitely going to share it. Especially at family gatherings. These weren't cozy evenings with board games and apple pie. We're talking sharp elbows, fierce bragging rights, and subtle power plays disguised as concern. My dad, before he passed, used to call it competitive kindness. As in, "Oh, we love you, dear, but just so you know, we're definitely doing better than you are." After he died, things shifted. My mom, bless her heart, tried to hold it all together, but without his calming presence, I started feeling like an outsider, especially around my uncle Victor Callahan. He's my dad's younger brother, the kind of guy who peaked in his mid-30s and hasn't stopped talking about it since. He runs a small chain of auto shops and genuinely believes he's the next Mark Cuban. His kids, my cousins, went to state schools, but you'd think they were Ivy League based on his bragging. Family barbecues were essentially his personal TED Talks. Then there's Logan Pierce, Uncle Victor's golden boy. Tall, smug, with perfectly gelled hair. He's 31, works for a mid-tier insurance company, but acts like he's a Wall Street titan. We were close as kids, but then he learned he could get ahead by stepping on people instead of helping them. He's the kind of guy who'll flash a charming smile while he's subtly picking your pocket. So, when Logan announced he was engaged and the party was at Uncle Victor's, I almost bailed. But Mom persuaded me. She said it was very important to her. She didn't want people speculating. And I got it. I'd been quiet for the last 3 years, kept a low profile, rarely posted online, skipped events. I'd let them believe whatever they wanted. That I was still delivering pizzas. That I hadn't found my way yet. That I was just coasting. That night, I parked a few houses down, just to avoid the parade of luxury SUVs filling Uncle Victor's driveway. I walked in wearing a clean, simple button-up and jeans. Nothing flashy, just enough to pass. The place was packed. String lights in the backyard, expensive catered finger foods, jazz tinkling through a Bluetooth speaker. It reeked of forced elegance. Of course, Uncle Victor was holding court near the grill, beer in hand, barking out jokes like a third-rate comedian. He spotted me before I even reached the patio. "Ethan," he bellowed dramatically. "Hello? Look who finally showed up. Everyone, make way for the Pizza Prince." Heads turned, a few polite laughs rippled through the crowd. My jaw tightened, but I smiled. "Good to see you too, Uncle Victor," I said, shaking his hand. He grinned, leaned in, and muttered under his breath, "Hope you brought coupons," before letting out another loud laugh, as if we were sharing some hilarious inside joke. We weren't. Not even close. The truth is, I could have ended it right there. I could have said something to shut him down. But I didn't. I've learned that sometimes the best revenge is quiet. It's patient. It waits for the perfect moment. So I just smiled. That calm, practiced smile that perfectly hides everything underneath. I mingled, greeted a few relatives, kissed Mom on the cheek, and told her everything was fine. But inside, I was simmering. Not because of the insult. Honestly, I'd heard worse. It just reminded me how little they truly knew me. And that's when it happened. Logan and his fiancée emerged from the house about 25 minutes later. She was attractive, poised, a little stiff, like she'd rehearsed every word she planned to say. Her name was Melline Hart. She wore a champagne-colored dress and jewelry that screamed, "You buy this, just to say you own it. She smiled at the crowd as they clapped and cheered, but when her eyes met mine, everything just stopped. Time paused. Her expression dropped, not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. Her smile flickered. Her grip on Logan's arm subtly loosened. Her pupils darted back to me, narrowing slightly, before she pulled out her phone. She typed something in, then stared at the screen. Her face went pale. She nudged Logan, showed him the screen. He blinked, frowned, looked at me, looked at the phone, then looked at me again. The music kept playing. People kept talking. But something in the air shifted, like a storm cloud no one else could quite see yet. I took a sip of my drink and leaned against the patio railing, watching, waiting, because I knew exactly what she had Googled and what was going to happen next. Even though no one was speaking about it, you could feel the tension ripple across the backyard like a silent wave. Not directly, but the glances started. The little posture changes. Logan kept looking at me with narrowed eyes, like he was trying to fit me into a puzzle that suddenly made no sense. I didn't move. I just watched. Waited. Melanie whispered something to him, then excused herself and retreated inside. Logan looked stunned for a moment before following, not even trying to hide his bewilderment. A few people noticed, including Uncle Victor, who tilted his head in confusion. He muttered something to one of his buddies, and they laughed again, probably another joke at my expense. But the atmosphere was changing. Still, I didn't say a word. Just let it all simmer. Normally, someone going pale, whispering, and walking away like they'd seen a ghost would spark curiosity, if not concern. But not in this family. No one asked how I was doing, what I'd been up to, or if I was all right. Instead, they just resumed their program, making small talk as if I were a supporting character in someone else's highlight reel. A few minutes later, I went inside for another drink. That's when I saw Logan and Melanie huddled in the hallway near the guest bathroom. Logan's face was a mirror of her earlier disbelief. His voice was low, but I caught the end of a sentence as I walked by. That cannot be him. He was delivering. He delivers pizzas for God's sake. Melanie just shook her head. It's him, she explained. It's definitely him. I kept walking, as if I hadn't heard a thing, my heart pounding, but my face calm, cool, and collected. Luckily, the kitchen was empty. I grabbed a soda from the fridge and drank it slowly, breathing deeply, grounding myself. Because I knew what was coming. It wouldn't be dramatic at first. Nobody would scream or throw drinks. That wasn't how this family operated. No, this was going to be slow, controlled, manipulative. Death by 1,000 smiles. I didn't have to wait long. By the time I got back outside, things had changed. Not loudly, but subtly, deeply wrong. People I'd known my entire life were now giving me these curious, slightly forced smiles. The kind you give when you're pretending you don't know something shocking. Uncle Victor was watching me more closely now, as was Logan's mother, Aunt Caroline Whitmore. She had that fake concerned expression she always used when she wanted to fish for gossip without looking like she was fishing. I leaned against a post near the string lights, watching everything unfold. I was done mingling, done playing along. Then Logan approached. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked perplexed, irritated, as if I had personally duped him and needed to explain myself. Hey, he said, his voice tight. I just raised an eyebrow. Hey. He looked around, then lowered his voice. So, could you explain what this is? He held up his phone. The screen displayed a Forbes article. Not a huge feature, just one of those side stories they run on aspiring entrepreneurs. But my face was there, my name, my company. It was only the bare bones of the story. I shrugged. You searched for me on Google. I guess you found out. He seemed irritated. So what? You've just been sitting on this, letting everyone think you're still a broke delivery guy? Letting, I repeated. I didn't exactly correct anyone, but I never said I was broke. He let out a quiet, mirthless laugh. You're unbelievable. I get that a lot. I replied, taking another sip of soda. Do you know what this looks like? He snapped. Like you're trying to make us look stupid. You didn't need my help with that. His jaw tightened. Melanie freaked out. She said you attended a tech conference with Tim Cook last year. What? I tilted my head, pretending to think. Oh, yes, that was fun. The guy's actually pretty weird in person. You're messing with me? He growled. No, Logan. I'm really not. Just then, Uncle Victor joined us. Is everything all right here? He inquired, stepping between us like a referee. Except he didn't seem concerned. He looked curious, calculating, like he'd just caught the scent of something juicy and expensive. "Everything's fine," I said before Logan could respond. Uncle Victor gave me a long look. "Heard there's some kind of mix-up going on," he said, smirking. "Didn't realize you were the big tech guy now, Ethan." I shrugged. "I don't often bring it up. Doesn't really fit with the whole pizza delivery image." He laughed. This time, though, it wasn't mocking. It was probing. "You've been pulling a fast one on us all this time, huh?" "Nope," I replied calmly. "You just never asked." That night should have ended there. Of course, it didn't. The story had only just begun to unravel as Melanie and Logan shared what they'd discovered online, and the rest of the family began digging too. One cousin found an old Bloomberg interview. Another found my name listed as the founder of a startup recently valued in the low 8 figures. And when they saw photos of me at summits in suits, shaking hands with people they'd only seen on TV, the mood changed. Suddenly, I wasn't a failure. I was the unknown variable. They weren't sure what to do with me anymore. And that's when the masks finally came off. The next morning, my mom texted me. Uncle Victor had called her, she said. He wanted to catch up properly and discuss business with me. I laughed, but didn't respond. Then the call started. Aunt Caroline Whitmore, my cousin Carter Hayes, even Logan, who left a strangely polite voicemail asking if I wanted to grab lunch sometime. I said no to every single one. I assumed that would be the end of it. But they couldn't let it go. A few weeks later, a wedding invitation arrived in the mail. Logan Pierce and Melanie Hart. Formal. No +1. That was strange, but whatever. I hadn't planned on going. I set it aside. 3 days later, a handwritten follow-up note from Aunt Caroline Whitmore. Full of fake sweetness. We'd love to have you there, Ethan. Perhaps you can finally share some of your projects with your family. Everyone is incredibly proud of you. I crumpled it and tossed it. Then my mom called again. Her voice was quiet, hushed, as if she didn't want to be overheard. Ethan, she asked, do you know what they're planning? No, and I don't want to know. She paused. They've been telling people that you're funding the wedding. I froze. What? They're telling everyone that you offered, that it was your way of showing gratitude to the family, that you want to reconnect. My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken to Logan since that night. I hadn't made a single offer. I hadn't even RSVP'd. But they were using me, my name, my money, to elevate their position. That wasn't just entitled. It was a betrayal. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as Mom continued. And they've been hinting that you're going to speak at the reception, that you're going to give some big speech about family and success and second chances. I hung up. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying everything. The lies, the manipulation, the phony kindness, the years of dismissal followed by this desperate, unexpected need. They hadn't changed. They'd just recalculated. And they assumed I'd play along. They believed they could weaponize my success. The same success they mocked when I was broke, tired, and delivering pizzas in the rain. They believed they could once again exert control over me. That's when I made my decision. Not out of spite or pride, but because some people just need to learn the hard way. I started making calls. I didn't get much sleep that night. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because something deeper within me had changed. That moment when my mother told me they were using my name to fund their image, it broke something. Not a dramatic fall to the floor, but a quiet shattering, a realization I'd been avoiding for years. I'd never truly felt a part of this family, at least not in the way they claimed. I think, deep down, I always knew. I just kept hoping things would get better, that if I worked hard enough and succeeded big enough, they'd finally see me. Not as an underachieving child whose father died too young. Not as the pizza guy. Not as a cautionary tale. Just Ethan. But that moment, hearing they'd created an entire narrative around me without my knowledge, for their own gain, cut through it all. There was no more hoping or waiting. I needed to make a choice. Play along to keep the peace, or finally step back and take control of the narrative. That's when I began making calls. But before we get there, I need to explain something. See, the part they never knew or cared to inquire about was what happened after I reached my lowest point. They knew I delivered pizzas a few years ago. Yes, that part was correct. They didn't know why. 3 years after graduating college, I lost everything. I'd gotten a job at a promising fintech startup right out of school. It wasn't glamorous, but I believed in the product and the people. I threw myself in. Long nights, no weekends, pouring my heart and soul into something I believed was important. But then the funding dried up, the CEO resigned, Investors backed out, and I was out of a job. I tried freelancing, consulting, took on debt to stay afloat. My savings ran out faster than I expected, and my pride prevented me from calling home, from asking for assistance. I didn't want their sympathy, especially Victor's. So I swallowed it and picked up whatever work I could get. Pizza delivery was consistent. It paid just enough, and it gave me time to think. People always think of those jobs as the bottom of the barrel, but I met some of the most grounded, hard-working people during those shifts. The old guy on late-night runs who always brought extra sauce, just in case. The college dropout who could reassemble a motorcycle engine from scratch. The single mother who worked 2 jobs and laughed louder than anyone else on staff. They taught me more about hustle and dignity than any boardroom ever could. During those late-night shifts, I started sketching out ideas, concepts, business models. I'd get home around 1:30 a.m., crash for a few hours, then wake up to work on prototypes. I didn't have much, but I had time and motivation. Eventually, one of those concepts stuck. I built a beta and asked an old professor for advice. He connected me with a former student turned investor. One pitch led to another, and soon I had enough funding to hire a small team. We worked from a friend's basement for 8 months. It wasn't glamorous, but it was genuine, and it grew. We solved a niche problem in digital authentication, and word spread faster than we anticipated. A big client signed on, followed by another. Then a venture capital firm came knocking. The rest was a blur. We scaled, got noticed, and raised a round that turned heads. That Forbes article was only a footnote, but it was the first time anyone outside our world saw what we'd accomplished. And throughout the process, every milestone, every breakthrough, I kept my mouth shut about it to my family. I didn't try to hide anything. I just knew they weren't listening. Which brings us back to the wedding. By the time the RSVP deadline arrived, I had a plan. Not out of vengeance, at least not pure vengeance, but because I was sick of pretending I didn't care. I sent my response, attending. No +1. No comments. Just that one word. They intended to use me as a prop. Fine. I'd play along, just not in the way they expected. The month leading up to the wedding was unusually quiet. No more calls, no more texts. They seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the spotlight to turn on. I imagined them rehearsing speeches, telling stories about how close we were, how they always believed in me, how family helps family. It made me sick. So, I went back to those who did believe in me. I called my old mentor. I called my co-founders. I even called 4 of my first delivery coworkers from the pizza place and explained what was going on. And you know what? They had my back. We brainstormed. We laughed. We even joked about bringing a pizza to the reception just to prove a point. But beneath the humor, there was a quiet sense of solidarity. These were people who had seen me fail and rebuild from the ground up. And they didn't rely on headlines or LinkedIn posts to validate me. They understood the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt stable. I'd spent years striving for success, believing it would fill the void left by my father's absence, the constant family jabs, my mother's quiet disappointment. But success didn't solve the problem. They did. Real ones. The night before the wedding, I flew in and booked a room at a modest hotel across town, rather than the luxury resort they'd reserved for their preferred guests. I didn't want the welcome basket. I didn't want the pre-wedding brunch. I wanted to walk into that event as myself, not as their pawn. I wore a simple black suit with no tie, no designer labels, just clean lines and quiet confidence. And yes, I brought something else. A small envelope was tucked in my pocket, thick, heavy, and tightly sealed. But we'll get to that later. The ceremony was fine, boring even. Logan stood there, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Meline looked flawless, polished, and robotic. The vows were copied and pasted, devoid of any real sincerity. No one tripped. Nobody cried. The photographs were overly posed. It was exactly as expected. The reception was held in a vineyard just outside the city. Expensive, overly decorated with white roses and string quartets. Someone would glare at you if you laughed too loudly. I kept to myself for the first hour. Watched. Observed. Uncle Victor worked the room like a campaign manager, smiling and shaking hands, telling everyone how close our family was. Aunt Caroline clinked glasses with strangers and leaned into every photograph as if it were her own. Logan looked smug, as if he had finally become the man he had always aspired to be until he saw me. He froze for a second before plastering on a smile, and moving over. "Ethan," he said, arms open as if we were old friends. I gave him a tight nod. "Glad you could make it," he said. "Really glad." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. He glanced around nervously. "Hey, listen, just to clear the air. I didn't intend for things to get weird after the engagement party. I believe there was some miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" I echoed. "Like telling people I was funding your wedding?" His smile wavered. "Look, that wasn't me, okay? That was Mom and Dad's attempt to make the family look good. You know how they are." I nodded slowly. "You're not mad, right?" he asked, his voice low. "Because we could use a moment like this. It's good optics for both of us. Win-win." That's when I realized he still didn't understand. He saw me only as a story to tell, a success to build on. I moved a step closer. "Don't worry, Logan," I replied. "I've got something special planned." His eyes lit up, believing I had finally given in. "Really? Really?" And then I walked back to my seat, returning to the envelope in my pocket. Because the best part of starting over is getting to choose who sits at the table and who gets cut off. I don't think I've ever seen Logan Pierce look more smug than at his wedding reception. He moved through the crowd like he was the Prince of Monaco, shaking hands and sharing inside jokes with people he barely knew, as if his surname meant anything outside of that vineyard. It was the type of event where no one came to celebrate love. They turned up to be seen. Logan adored that kind of theater. But that night, I was more than just a guest. I was the unexpected wild card. The envelope in my inside jacket pocket felt heavier by the minute. Not because of its weight, which wasn't light, but because of what it symbolized. Inside were carefully printed documents, bound in a crisp band and tucked into a thick paper sleeve with a simple logo. No frills, no drama. But they'd cause both. And the best part? I hadn't come alone. That's something no one in my family ever thought to ask. Who can I trust? For them, trust was a transaction. You trusted people who could give you something. You aligned with those who improved your image. For me, however, trust wasn't about gaining. It was about truth. It was about loyalty forged in dark, quiet places. Over coffee at 3 a.m. following a failed pitch. On rainy pizza shifts, lending someone gas money without asking. In that dingy basement startup office where we nearly gave up, but didn't. Those are who I called. Some of them were at the wedding, despite not wearing tuxedos or being on the guest list. See, when you start from the ground up, you learn how to work in the background. You learn how to move without drawing attention until it's too late. Most importantly, you learn how to identify leverage, where it hides, how to use it, and when to strike. The weeks leading up to the wedding weren't just spent stewing, venting, or coming up with clever one-liners. I spent that time doing what I do best, research. I didn't go digging for dirt because I wanted revenge. I dug because I needed to know who I was dealing with. I needed to know how deep the rot was. Logan Pierce had secrets. Of course he did. The wedding cost upwards of $82,000, despite Uncle Victor's claims of keeping it classy but affordable. The venue charged more than most people's annual rent. The dress code was black tie optional, but black tie was considered mandatory. There were signature cocktails named after the couple, live jazz, a photo booth with a branded neon sign, and imported flowers. All of this should have raised red flags on its own, especially given Logan's modest salary at the insurance company. But no one in the family questioned it. They simply assumed the money came from me. It was their mistake. They counted on my silence. However, I only speak up when it matters. I learned from a mutual acquaintance who used to work with Logan that he'd been floating investment opportunities to co-workers for the past year, telling them he had an inside track with a startup, my startup, and that if they invested now, they'd see returns within 8 months at the very least. It wasn't even subtle. He used my name. He showed people my press clippings, screenshots of my LinkedIn, statistics from articles I'd written, and told them he had a direct line to me, that I trusted him, that we were practically co-founders. The kicker? He'd already made nearly $68,000. It wasn't enough to cover the entire wedding, but it gave him enough leeway to book vendors and pretend he was paying out of pocket. The rest stemmed from quiet promises made to Uncle Victor's friends, businessmen who thought they were investing in the next tech unicorn, men who assumed that if Victor's nephew was involved, the entire operation must be legitimate. Except for me, no one else blinked twice when they heard the lie. So, I gathered receipts and statements, contacted my legal team, and asked them to review the claims. We didn't want to push anything through the courts just yet, but we wanted to be prepared. I even phoned one of the investors. Let's call him Graham Sterling. Graham Sterling was a mid-tier real estate developer with an unusually pleasant demeanor. I expected arrogance, but instead, I got a man who sounded genuinely duped. You were prioritizing friends and family investors, Graham stated. He said the round was already nearly half full, and I needed to act quickly. How much have you given him? I asked. $30,000. I cashed out some stocks. I felt a pit forming in my stomach. Do you realize I never authorized any of that? I spoke carefully. There was a prolonged pause. I do now. He wasn't angry, but rather disappointed. And those are the people I can't bear to see hurt. The ones who believe too quickly, trust too deeply, and simply want to be a part of something. That's when I realized I couldn't let this slide. Logan hadn't simply lied to his family. He lied to people like me, individuals who believed in something greater than themselves. He transformed their hope into leverage and their dreams into a cocktail budget. So, I requested favors. Graham Sterling attended the wedding, not as a guest, but as a +1 for one of my co-founders who had RSVP'd at the last minute under a false name. He wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, and brought a file folder. There were copies of everything inside: statements, emails, screenshots, proof. We weren't going to start a war that night, but we were going to lay a landmine. And the envelope in my jacket pocket wasn't for Logan. It was for Uncle Victor. Because while Logan was telling lies, Victor was spreading them. He was the one calling around after the engagement party, implying that Ethan was going to set the family up for life. The one informing Aunt Caroline that I was working on a family trust. The one who told his friend group that I had agreed to consult on their businesses as a favor for family. He weaponized my silence, just as Logan did. So I waited. The reception went on. Speeches were made. Toasts were given. Meline's father spoke for 25 minutes about love and commitment. Victor delivered a boisterous speech about family legacy and ambition, mentioning twice how proud he was of his nephew, the entrepreneur. I clapped along with everyone else. Then Logan took the microphone. He delivered a brief, rehearsed speech about meeting Meline, falling in love, and how she'd transformed his life. There was laughter, a few ahs, a brief pause that allowed the tension to build. Then he said it. And I'd like to express my gratitude to my cousin Ethan, he said, turning to face me. Most of you recognize him as the mastermind behind Signalbox. And let's just say that his support has been incredible. We wouldn't be here without him. The room applauded. I did not. I stood up calmly, quietly, and walked across the room to the head table. Uncle Victor smiled like a man about to receive a paycheck. I paused beside him and took out the envelope. For you, I replied, sliding it across the table. He blinked. What is this? I leaned in. Proof. Then I turned to walk away. There was no drama. No mic drop. No shouting. But I could feel eyes following me. Victor opened the envelope. I didn't need to see it. I knew as soon as he read the first page. His face lost its color. He flipped through the stack quickly, desperately. Logan leaned over, trying to read. Victor slapped his hand away. Meline looked perplexed. Aunt Caroline seemed concerned. Graham Sterling watched from across the room, arms folded. And me? I walked outside and breathed in the cool night air. Because revenge isn't always loud. It's the moment they realize the game has ended, and you've already left. The sound of string lights buzzing overhead and champagne glasses clinking behind me faded as I stepped outside into the vineyard's night air. The silence out here was too peaceful for what was happening inside. I stayed outside for a few minutes, just long enough for the envelope to really make an impact. I didn't need to see the first detonation. That wasn't the point. I'd already seen how Uncle Victor reacted when something didn't fit into his story. This time, he wouldn't be able to charm his way out. No backhanded jokes. No manipulation. Because this time, I had left nothing to interpretation. The packet I handed him contained more than just vague proof. It was a complete portfolio of every fraudulent claim Logan had made, every false promise signed in my name, every lie Victor himself had told to gain business clout in his own social circle. My attorney even sent a polite letter in clear, professional language. This is not a formal cease and desist order, nor is it a notice of legal action. However, if Mr. Ethan Parker's financial misrepresentation and defamation continue after the date of delivery, or if Mr. Parker is found to have suffered additional reputational damage as a result of Mr. Logan Pierce's false claims, our firm will send you additional legal correspondence. It was elegant, undeniable, irrefutable. By the time I returned inside, I didn't need to say anything. I could see it on their faces. Logan Pierce was pale and sweaty, his arm tightly wrapped around the back of Melline Hart's chair, which was now visibly leaning away from him. Her parents stood off to the side, whispering, their expressions shifting between confusion and dawning horror. Uncle Victor Callahan sat frozen, flipping through the last few pages repeatedly, hoping something had changed. Nothing had. Graham Sterling, the investor duped by Logan, approached the table with my co-founder beside him. They introduced themselves calmly and politely. Graham even smiled as he spoke. "Hello again, Logan," he said. "Funny seeing you here." Logan stood too quickly, knocking over his glass. "Graham, I can explain." "No need," Graham replied, raising a hand. "I'm not here to argue. I just wanted to let you know that I've started the process of filing a fraud complaint with the SEC, and my lawyers are preparing civil charges. You will hear from them soon. I expect full restitution for the $30,000 I gave you under false pretenses, plus damages." Logan looked at his father like a child seeking permission to cry. But Victor was no longer pretending to help. He sat slack-jawed, his empire of smoke and mirrors crumbling in front of him. That's the thing with people like him. They're fine as long as they control the narrative. But take away their script, and they're lost. "Victor," Graham Sterling said, turning toward him, "you vouch for your son. You mentioned that Ethan personally backed the investment. You told my wife over dinner that you were assisting with the payout schedule." Victor opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. "Don't worry," Graham Sterling said. "You'll receive a copy of the filing as well. Just a formality." The room was silent. No music, no chatter. Even the waitstaff paused at the edge of the room, as if they knew they were watching something both delicate and explosive at once. Then I walked up to Logan Pierce. He was sweating now, and his expensive suit did nothing to hide how small he appeared. He opened his mouth, presumably to plead, lie, or spin, but I cut him off with a single raised hand. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding," I said calmly, firmly. "I came here to stop you from ruining other people's lives." "Who? You could have just called me," he stammered. "I did," I responded. "You ignored me. Then you lied about me. Then you tried to profit from me." His gaze shifted to the guests, who were visibly uncomfortable, pretending not to listen, but failing. "And for what?" I asked. "A wedding? A photo op? You used my name and my silence to sell a lie to investors. To Melline Hart. To your own family." Melline Hart looked at him. Not how someone looks at a man they love. The way someone looks at a broken painting in a gallery and wonders how they could have seen beauty in it. "I didn't mean to," he began. "You meant every word," I replied. "You just didn't think I'd speak up." He attempted to take a step toward me, but Melline Hart rose from her seat and moved between us. She didn't even look at him. She turned to face me. "Ethan," she replied quietly. "I had no idea. I swear." "I know," I replied. "I saw it on your face the second you looked me up." She nodded, holding her arms. "We'll talk," she said to herself, rather than to him, before walking away. Not toward her parents or the crowd, but toward the exit. Logan Pierce took a shaky step after her before stopping. Nobody moved to stop him, and no one moved to help. The DJ, unsure what to do, gently resumed the music, but the illusion was shattered. The toasts were finished. The vibe was poisonous. One by one, people began leaving. Some made polite excuses. Others left without a word. A few gave me quiet nods of understanding as they passed, though no one dared speak to me out loud. Not now. Within 45 minutes, the wedding reception was down to a few awkward relatives and Uncle Victor Callahan, now sitting at a corner table, alone, defeated, staring into his untouched glass of whiskey. I walked by him once more, pausing just long enough for him to register me. "You brought this on yourself," I said. "I kept my distance for years. You just wouldn't leave well enough alone. You humiliated us," he said bitterly, his voice low. "No," I replied. "You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering for you." I didn't wait for a response. There wasn't going to be one. The next week, things moved quickly. Logan Pierce was placed on leave at his insurance firm the day after the wedding. By Friday, he was fired. Turns out, someone had leaked the wedding incident to the company's legal team. Between the active fraud investigation and the potential lawsuit from Graham Sterling, they couldn't afford to keep him. His employee bio vanished from the website overnight. Melanie Hart moved out of their shared apartment by the end of the month. I didn't talk to her again after the wedding, but I got a thank you card in the mail a few weeks later. There was a simple note inside. Thank you for showing me the truth. I almost built my future on a lie. I didn't reply. There wasn't anything else to say. As for Uncle Victor Callahan, his reputation took the biggest hit of all. Turns out the investors he'd been bragging to were less than thrilled when they found out his entrepreneur nephew wasn't backing anything. At least 2 of them pulled out of joint ventures with him within the month. Rumors started to swirl. His name became mud in their business circles. One of his long-running partnerships quietly dissolved. His auto shop franchise is still standing, but not untouched. People talk, customers listen. The last I heard, he downsized significantly. My mom asked me if I regretted any of it. Not in a judgmental way, just a mother's voice, weary and concerned. I told her the truth. I regret letting it go on for so long. She didn't press after that. I think in her heart, she knew it had been a long time coming. Life moved on. My company continued to grow. We landed a government contract 8 months later that nearly tripled our valuation. I hired more people, expanded offices, took care of the team who'd been there since day one. The ones who stood with me when I had nothing but ideas and a mountain of unpaid bills. And I never delivered another pizza again. But sometimes late at night, I still think about those years. The long shifts, the stares from people who thought they had me figured out, the silence from the people who were supposed to lift me up, and how I survived all of it. Not by shouting, not by proving myself over and over again, but by staying quiet until I didn't. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't scream. It's smile while they underestimate you, and then watch their whole house of cards come crashing down.